for this.
Wonderful. So I actually feel like I could probably fill up all of our time just giving the neuroscience perspective on a lot of the questions you were asked, such as default state networks, which are often the characterization of the brain's resting state, which turn out to be predictive of a lot of how we behave. So when you have no mind, which you in fact never actually have, but when you just look at that default activity across a large-scale brain with the kind of models that Greg was talking about, it turns out it's predictive of how people react to different stimuli and how they behave out in the world. So it's really interesting. There's no mind that is no mind, like that the person doesn't embody in the moment. So one time, I should preface this by saying the first time I ever gave this talk was to a girls who code class, and it ran about 3 hours, so that's not good. The last time I gave it was Monday night at a reception at the White House. That was about an hour and a half. So we're going to need to trim this down a bit, and you may notice that I slightly skip over some issues. About the title, someone recently posed to me this problem, this question. What are the 5 words that uniquely describe you? And in my arrogance, I thought, well, gosh, I work in a world where we have things like hierarchical latent Dirichlet allocation combined with locus ceruleus. I can probably come up pretty easily with 5 unique words to describe my work. But 5 words that kind of capture it all turns out to be rather challenging. This was my shot at a slightly pop version of the 5 words that I thought captured a lot of my work. But in 20 minutes, we're not going to hit every one of those. So you might notice we're probably going to focus a little on the cyborgs and phonetics at this point, which may sound like a post-apocalyptic wasteland, but it's not. This is actually all good stuff. One interesting thing is I did my undergraduate work at UC San Diego, actually at the Salk Institute with Terry Sonosky, and there was a funny thing. A friend of mine was a security guard there. And he talked about how he had been, on his first day of work, the head of security took him out. The Salk Institute is absolutely beautiful, and it sits out over these sandstone bluffs above Black's Beach in San Diego, in La Jolla really. And they were taken out there, and there are these deep ravines that go down into the beach. He said, at any given time of year, there's probably 100 wild-eyed crazy men that live in these ravines, and you know, to be sure, the vast majority of them are not allowed on campus, but always be polite because some of them are faculty. And while I was there, I worked on a project doing lie detection for the CIA off of faces. This is one of those things I won't have time to talk about, but this is a sort of, let's call it a proto-deep neural network, learning about faces. Each one of these is a word in neural network space of faces. I did this for a system that reunited orphan refugees with extended family members for a UN project. But if you have questions, come back. We're going to jump over a whole bunch of stuff. Like I said, this is my first visit to the White House. That's the first ever presidential portrait taken with Google Glass. It doesn't take a good picture, but that's okay. And he thought I was a crazy person. The only reason he wanted to meet me was because the Secret Service had rousted me for wearing Google Glass live inside the White House. I gave this talk because I developed a system that helps autistic kids recognize facial expression. So it reads your expression, computes the emotion being expressed, writes it on the screen so that in natural interactions they can learn how to read facial expressions. I'm going to focus on some specific things. My son is out there right now, I think it's German, listening to German old Donald Duck videos on YouTube. And what is Donald Duck in German? Does it matter what language it's in when Donald Duck is making all the weird noises that come out of his mouth? They do speak Mandarin. So my son has type 1 diabetes, and it is deeply unfortunate that he has 2 parents that are scientists, sort of just as a blanket statement. Really, that's unfair. But one fortunate thing here was when he was diagnosed and I saw how the treatment went, I thought, this is crazy. You literally are by hand filling out pieces of paper for people to work out month-long diet insulin schedules for his insulin pump. So we invented a system that actually in real time fits his pump parameters, updates it, and it turns out it predicts whether he will go high or low. His blood sugar will go high or low in the future. I'll come back to that by reference, vague reference here. Here's a company, I sit on their board. You carry around your mobile phone, and I really am going fast. You carry around your mobile phone, and it estimates your emotional state, just passively, just by carrying it around. Turns out how you move through space, the gyroscope, the accelerometer, the ambient noise, the ambient light levels, can get a decent estimate on your emotional state. I agreed to join the board to predict manic and depressive episodes for bipolar sufferers. So imagine you go drug-free most of the time, and then you get a message, you and trusted confidant, saying, hey, high probability of a manic episode in the next 2 weeks, increase your medication, maybe take a week off from work, that sort of thing. It turns out $70 billion a year is lost to bipolar disease, the most economically costly mental health disorder. I wonder what's next. Oh, this is work I did. Actually, this is work I did at Carnegie Mellon. So this is as close as I get to combining art and science. These are also words, like I described that neural network before was face words. These are sound words. So this is what happens when we designed an algorithm that learned how to hear. I literally just walked around in a forest with a microphone, whereas this algorithm learn how to hear, like you were taking a little baby through the forest. Just turns out this one is not something that gets the police involved. So that's interesting. We designed the system, it learns how to hear, we had fun, we wrote a fairly impactful paper about it, but the really neat thing is we were then able to design a cochlear implant that learned how to hear. So imagine instead of just hand engineering what the filter set for a cochlear implant should be, instead you can train it to hear speech in noise. You can train it to hear music. People that often get cochlear implants input at an older age, after going through surgery, they'll turn it off because it's like listening to the world through a garbage disposal. I can actually play samples, but again, not a lot of time. I should say, however, that inspires my current focus of research at the Redwood Center, where, frankly, I'll admit, I spend maybe at best once a month. I'm on campus there, but it is cognitive neuroprosthetics. Can we literally jam something in your brain and make you smarter? And the amazing thing is, UC Berkeley and LBL is groundbreaking work is going on here with neural dust and things like that. And this is my one thing about cyborgs here is, even if none of you in the room think that you will have anything to do with this from a research perspective, from engineering, get involved in care anyways. This isn't science fiction, and in 20 to 30 years, this will be part of the human experience. And I guarantee you, if we all don't play a role in deciding how that plays out for us in social policy, then, and I say this with no disrespect for Google whatsoever, but they will. Yeah. Okay, now we are finally to the stuff I'm actually going to slow down for a little bit. Anyone care to guess what, I always think this is like a tropical bird or something. Anyone care to guess what each of the little dots here is? There's actually a big hint from earlier talk.
Interaction? Well,
it's kind of like it is interactions, although it's not well represented here, yeah.
A single neuron firing.
That's a good one. I certainly have a lot of that data, but it is a little bit closer to this one, and it is online discussions between students in a course. What we aren't mapping out is the interactions. What is represented here, however, is the semantics of what they're talking about. In fact, a fairly deep look at the semantics. So QuickStep was a project that my wife, who at the time she wasn't here, but before that I was here at the Redwood Center, she was at the School of Education, and we designed a system that in this case worked with data from University of Phoenix. And every one of these is a post by a student in an undergraduate biology course. And we could take each of those posts, and this network would learn biology from the students. The good, the bad, and the ugly, right? It didn't know what was wrong, but it knew how students thought about biology. And then later, we also had MBA students in an economics course, and it learned economics from those students. And then very simple. Forget if this seems a bit wonky, but we layer a very simple system, a logistic regression on top of that, to predict the grades of the students in the course. Then 20,000 new students entered those two courses with new teachers, new assessments, and of course new students. And we had never looked at anyone's homeworks or final exams or anything before, just their online interactions. Week 1, we knew what grade they would get. As the course progressed, week by week, we knew with greater and greater accuracy what they would get wrong or right on the final exam. And in the end, we knew within 2 points what their 100-point score in the course would be. So I'll come back to it, and I was so enormously proud. We published a paper, you know, we went and talked to teachers, and they'd say, wow, that's amazing. What am I supposed to do with this? It's like, really? If we could tell you that these 5 students will fail your class the way you're going to teach it, you can't leverage that for something? One of the things I've learned as an entrepreneur is you never put the burden on your customer. You need to figure out how to take this sort of thing and make it transparently useful for them. But it turns out there's something even deeper and more problematic than that. Now I'm going to do something you should never do in a talk, which is skip slides and jump around. But the structure of this is a little bit imperfect for our purposes. There we go. So this, after publishing that paper, for 2 years I was chief scientist of a company called Guild. And at Guild, I built models that predicted how good everyone in this room is at your jobs before you ever had the job. So the whole goal was to take bias out of the hiring process. Not strictly sort of classic discriminatory bias, but are we overrating schools? Are we underrating skills? Just the whole thing. How do we know we're hiring the right people? So here's a classic example. This guy's named Jade Dominguez. He was actually a pretty good high school student, but no one ever cares about that. He didn't go to college. No one in his family had gone to college. He lives in LA or lived in LA. He started selling t-shirts on the street, very entrepreneurially. Like, he'd create them, silk screen, put them out. And then he thought, you know what, if I had a website, I could sell more. So he starts a website, like an old-fashioned WordPress site. And in fact, he sells some more t-shirts, but he thinks, I can do even better than that. So he teaches himself how to program. Ruby was his language of choice. And he sells even more t-shirts. Not good enough. He gets deep into Ruby. He actually starts committing updates to the code base of Ruby. So companies around the world are using his code, and they're the backbone of their web infrastructure without even realizing it. And now he's thinking, wait a minute, why am I selling t-shirts in LA? I should be getting a job in Silicon Valley. So he starts sending resumes. And he gets no for a year. He doesn't just get no's. He doesn't even get a response for an entire year. So this company comes along, and the clever idea of the company was actually mine through all the open source code in the world, figure out who's good, and then when it turned out that a couple 100,000 people wasn't enough to satisfy Google every week, then hire me to build predictive models that could take, even when we don't have code samples, could actually predict if someone's good. So he gets a call from this company that says, hey, we'd love to fly you up to the Bay Area and interview for a front-end lead developer job, because our algorithm says you're the second best Ruby developer in all of Los Angeles. People were turning him down that were running his code. They weren't even considering. When you look at how this works in the world, you get 5 seconds. They look at your name, your school, and your last job. His name's Dominguez. You gotta say more. He never went to school, and he never had a last job, not at a corporate level. So he's done. 5 seconds and went into the trash. Wasn't even worth their time to say no. What was fascinating about those models, and now what I'll jump back to the previous slides, is what was predictive. Let's hit the HR no-nos. Race, gender, and age. First 2 are not predictive. Turned out age was only predictive with respect to really new languages, and that favored older developers. Like, it's nice when you don't have to learn how to program and learn a new language at the same time. How about traditional things? education and your work history and so forth. Grades were not predictive whatsoever. Standardized test scores were not predictive whatsoever. The school you attended was not very strongly predictive. In fact, our algorithms said that the top 5 schools in the world in order were Stanford, Caltech, MIT, Berkeley, and Carnegie Mellon. Stanford was only a very modest positive predictor of your ability as a software developer. Turns out, interestingly enough, a PhD in anything from anywhere was more predictive than that. The kind of person that would, frankly, waste 5 years of their life exploring some esoteric question that no one else cared about, that's actually someone you want to hire. Okay, so what is? Well, that would take a long time to go into, but we called it meta-learning. And it turns out, when I look, and I'll be giving, actually, it turns out a TED Talk about this. When I looked at the best developers in the world, and the best salespeople, and the best skateboarders, the same things were predictive. And it was about general cognitive ability, metacognition, emotion, mindset, leadership, a lot of things that people talk about broadly today. But it turns out it's not your skill set, and it's not your education history, or these sorts of things. So let's, if we can do this terrible thing again and skip back across a whole bunch of slides. Let's go back to this question.
Out of curiosity,
Yeah.
given that the traditional predictors are so bad, would just randomly choosing people be better than?
There's actually a famous study that looked at random promotions and found that that was better than promoting to terminal capability, which is to say people get promoted until they're not good at the job anymore. Would random? No, in the sense that what's true is fishing from Berkeley, it's a stocked pool. You know, you really, if you hire from this building, you're probably going to get a good software developer. Like I said, it is a positive, if modest, predictor. But the total misinterpretation then is, therefore, if you don't have that degree, you're not any good. What we found is that there are roughly, once you equate it to the quality of work, for everyone that had a really fancy sort of pedigree to go along with that quality, we found 10 to 100 times as many people that didn't have those pedigrees but produced the same quality of work. And we did find people with the pedigrees that really weren't any good. Often self-described by their own managers as, oh, they're just talkers. Okay, so let's go back to this. There are things we know. So I said there are these things we know that are predictors, and I haven't gone deep into them, but if you want to ask me, you're welcome. Things that we know are predictors, strong predictors, and it holds true across skateboarders and salespeople and software developers. Turns out it's also true in 5-year-olds. And there's a long and rich literature, research literature, in both in general looking at what is predictive of life outcomes. Probably the most famous example of this is the marshmallow test. But more importantly is that these things are known and that many of them are intervenable. So if it turns out, if we go through this wonderful study done, actually partially it came out of UC Berkeley, looking at an intervention study with kids in Jamaica, these marginalized at-risk toddlers in Jamaica, and they received for 2 years interventions targeted at the kind of things we were talking about, and then nothing for 20 years. A group of economists go down and study them. Turns out they earn 25% more than their at-risk peers. They spend less time incarcerated. They have lower cortisol levels, which is a strong predictor of health outcomes. They literally just simply leading better lives. Turns out you can actually add up what that means. In terms of the economic impact, if you scaled this across the United States, it would add something on the order of $1.3 to $1.8 trillion a year to the US GDP, a year, if you'd started it 25 years ago. So we'll finish up with this. This is my wife and I on stage at South by Southwest. Notice I'm wearing Google Glass. I'm getting updates on my son's blood glucose levels. I'm seeing tweets of what people think about my jokes. It's not pretty. And I'm also pitching an idea. What if we put microphones in the classroom with kindergartners, record everything they say, everything that's said back to them, and from that, given what we know, we literally predict their life outcomes? how long they'll live, how far they'll go in their education, how much money they'll make, how happy they'll be. Believe it or not, that's a construct, lifetime happiness. And we're working on a new one called community impact. That would be powerful. Turns out it's also a cursed crystal ball. If I tell you your daughter's going to get a Nobel Prize, it makes it less likely to happen. If I tell you your son's going to drop out in 5th grade, it makes it more likely to happen. It's like that old joke about a thermos, you know, it keeps the hot things hot and the cold things cold. How does it know? This is totally unfair. Like, it should make it more likely or less likely. It shouldn't just make it worse all the time, but it makes it worse all the time. So instead, what we did jointly with UT Austin was a project with migrant kindergartners where what we did with it was we sent a single message home every night. Parents, here's the one thing you can do tonight that will have the biggest impact on your child's life. And then we send another message the next night, another message the next night. And so this can be my finish. My company Sokos is actually launching this as a product. Great, I'm not going to sell you a product. We figured out how to actually do this. Take a picture of your kid's artwork. Ask them some questions. And we send you a message every night. Here's the one thing you can do tonight. We can deliver the whole thing via SMS for free around the world. And wonderful companies that I will leave unnamed for the moment have agreed to sponsor this so that kids in Liberia can get it for free, kids in Bolivia can get it for free, in the Philippines, we're now in talks in China, and yes, there will be an app here, and I'm going to be so grotesque as to throw this app. If anyone cares about the app, you're welcome to let your friend know that they can text Kindersight to 33444. But really more importantly is we can literally optimize these kids' life outcomes by closing the loop and tracking this, what we call naturalistic data, and making these highly specific life-altering recommendations to the kids, a nudge every night. So that was a mad sprint through, I think I still have actually 157 slides left to go. But I'm going to leave those behind, and please thank you so much for your attention.